How are you doing on sound in here? Can everyone hear okay? The back table says yes. Does anyone know any good relevant jokes? Probably not. We'll get started here in a few minutes. Although I don't think we're going to have any more people dragging in right now, so I will get started. I'd like to introduce our panel. On your far right is Mark Anderson. He's a Rapid City native who survived the '72 flood. His experience turned into a career-long interest in hydrology and floods. And here are some of his highlights. Educated at the South Dakota School of Mines and the University of Arizona. Worked professionally in Oregon, Arizona, South Dakota, and D.C., mostly for the U.S. Geological Survey. Directed science on first controlled flood experiments in Colorado River below Glen Canyon Dam. Has anybody been to Glen Canyon Dam? It's an amazing place. Glen Canyon Dam, and awarded the Secretary of Interior's Unit Award for Excellence in Service. Senior Deputy Advisor to the President's Science Advisory for the White House for 3 years. Which president was that, Mark?
Clinton and Bush.
Clinton and Bush. Acting Director for EROS in Sioux Falls. Landsat Program, retired as Director of USGS Water Center for North Dakota and South Dakota. Adjunct Professor of School of Mines and taught water law and policy in geology field camp. Served on international and joint commission between U.S. and Canada for Milk and St. Mary's Rivers. Where are those rivers at, Mark?
The green out of Glacier National Park.
All right.
Go into Canada and then come back to Fast Water and let people argue about that.
No kidding. I can imagine. Moving ahead with our panel, Don Konechne is a rancher, experienced the '72 flood firsthand, witnessing the impacts and devastation of 15 inches of rain on local creeks and tributaries. He provided rescue efforts and witnessed the role of first responders in the rescue efforts. Don, we're glad that you're here to steer us in the right direction. Next we have Dr. Jerry Wright. Jerry experienced the '72 Black Hills flood firsthand and provided rescue efforts as a young man. In his career, Jerry worked in the construction industry for 20 years, owning a business from 1975 to 1987, and then worked on a division manager for city's solid waste division from 1987 to 2010. He served on the Rapid City Council from 2011 to 2017, obtained a PhD in civil engineering from the School of Mines in 2019. How old were you when you got that degree? 71, 3 years ago. Imagine that. Served in the U.S. Army active in the reserve from 1971 through 1997 and 2006 through 2007. And as I recall, you served in Afghanistan, Kuwait, in Iraq. All right. Next in the line and first up will be Dr. Perry Rahn. Perry has been affiliated with the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology since 1968. That's almost before I was born, Perry. Professor from 1979 through 1997 as a professor emeritus, 1970 to present. Professor Emeritus of Geology Engineering at South Dakota Mines. He served as the director of the Black Hills Natural Science Field Station from 1995 to 1999. He has authored more than 150 publications and conducted dozens of research projects and provided dozens of consulting experiences on a wide array of topics, including the impact, effect, and analysis of the Black Hills flood of 1972. Please help me welcome to the lectern Dr. Perry Rahn. I think you'll need to.
Yeah. Okay. Floods are natural events. Flood disasters occur when floodplains become urbanized. I'm going to talk about the 1 square mile right in downtown Rapid City along Rapid Creek here. You see a map. The creek comes right through town. So you'll see the 1 square mile between West Boulevard and East Boulevard. This is where highest concentration of deaths occurred from the flood. This is the earliest map I could find of Rapid City, 1898. There you see Rapid Creek coming through. You notice the town is built south of the creek. Omaha, St. Joe, Main Street, and so on is all south. They didn't build houses on the floodplain. That was hay lands. In fact, Rapid City was called Hay Camp. Well, come on. Oh, there it is. Creeks meander, and that's how floodplain is formed. Here, down by Caputa, see Rapid Creek meandering all over the place. So that's how this fairly flat area, the side of the stream channel, is formed, and it's also the area subject to floods. I must have hit the backwards button. There we go. This doesn't work. All right, this is a geologic map of this area. You see West Boulevard and East Boulevard, and Rapid Creek now is straight. It doesn't meander, it was straightened. Man-made impact. The yellow color is a geologist map, is the alluvium, so that delineates the floodplain. So the flood hazardous area was known and mapped before the flood, but nobody paid any attention to it. Back in those days, there were no regulations, and the houses and streets went in there. Here's an old air photo, 1938, that shows an old meander coming in past West Boulevard and then up around like that, and then to East Boulevard. There's the railroad track coming to the Trisco Mill. And you see by 1938, this was largely urbanized. So the next photo is 1952. You'll see even further urbanization. Again, the railroad track crossing the creek here. That old meander is hardly visible, just streets and all were laid right across it. 1968, just before the flood, that's what Rapid City intensely urbanized. Houses that the inhabitants didn't know what disaster was about to happen there. Innocent people moved in and were caught. Let me go back and try to get this peak photo of. This was right after the flood. Yeah, this was taken 8 days after the June 9th flood. And if you look closely at the buildings, they're gone in several blocks. Others are out of place, cockeyed. Water came through in the middle of the night, and the houses didn't have much of a chance. This shows the discharge peak, 50,000 cubic feet per second, came around midnight. So the flood started around 9 o'clock in the evening. It was getting dark, and was gone by 3 o'clock the next morning, Saturday. So can you imagine the horror of having in the dark? And one has to ask, who was responsible for all these people who died? Well, I think it was the people back in the 1910s and 1920s who urbanized the floodplain. They may have been well-meaning, but they were mostly unconcerned about the hazard. And original agricultural lands, what people owned it, subdivided it, and then realtors came in, and surveyors, the contractors, and even the city officials who helped develop the streets, these contributed to the devastation. And even people back then who knew about the floodplain being hazardous, but didn't speak out, were complicit. They too contributed to the tragedy. So I'm going to cut short my slideshow here because we have the other speakers, and I'll be open for a question or more discussion. I'd just like to close by saying that the landscape changed over the years, and now we have a greenway, and a lot of credit goes to Mayor Don Barnett and the city engineer, Leonard Swanson, who made sure that the city council went along with him and developed a greenway, and we did not have a rebuilding of houses back there. Thanks for your attention.
Dr. Wright? Sure. I have those slides so you can close your eyes and take a nap. I'll keep you awake anyway. To add to what Perry said, in 1974 I came back here from grad school and went to work for the city planning department. One time I was working through the city library or the city hall library, I can't remember. I wrote a report, I told Perry about it, told other people about it. It was written in 1963. It was put out together by some people from the faculty of the School of Mines and other citizens, other community leaders. And I remember the phrase at the end of it said something to the effect, the Rapid Creek floodway should be cleared, but at this point it's politically unacceptable. That was 9 years before the flood. So we often ignore what we're doing, okay? Like I said earlier, it's kind of like don't sell Japanese steel in 1938. We ignore stuff. We're such fools. I'm here to talk about the absolute horror of what happened that night. I was home on a leave from my job in Montana to go to grad school. And I was going to leave Rapid City on June 10th. June 9th, my brother and I were going to go to Piedmont and visit with a friend of ours from Canada, have a beer and say goodbye and head out next day. On our way to Piedmont, we got stopped at the bridge at Highway 79 in Box Elder Creek, which is right what we used to call the dog track. We were told that there was a trailer house up against the bridge with kids in it, children. So we said, this is not good. And we could see it, the trailer houses were pushed up against it. We had no idea what was in there. We went back to our folks' house and got some axes and ropes, and we were going to go back and help. Thank God we got delayed, because we got there, and had we been there 5 minutes before, I wouldn't be here. We pulled up on scene, and the first time our older brother did what I told him was to get the hell out of here. We started backing up. The wall of water comes down from the canyon. You could see the mud, muck, and trees and all that crap. We got out of the way, and kind of things settled down, kind of. There's still, I think, probably knee-high waist-high water going through the area. We started seeing flashlights, people screaming, wanting help. And we noticed the trailer houses there on the west side of the road were floated out of the Alaska Mobile Home Sales Office, and they're zigzagged up and down the highway. We could see some spotlights or flashlights in a tree up the road about 1,000 feet, if that. So we went through the trailer houses. We'd go in one door, walk down the hallway, go out the other door, hop down, get another one, zigzag down, got them. There's two guys from, I think, Black Hills Co-op. We brought them back to the trailer houses, got them home safe. And then we went down to it. There's a house on the east side of Highway 79. It's still there. And we were told there was a whole bunch of people in there wanting to get out. Well, the guard showed up with a deuce and a half, which is one of those big six-wheel trucks they keep talking about. And they brought it down, and we started helping getting people out of the house. And this is, you know, if I wasn't supposed to live through this, I shouldn't have lived on the next one. I was carrying a baby from the house to the truck because the mother said, he's only a week old, I don't want to take the risk of carrying him. I said, I'll take him, it's okay with me. Carrying out to this truck, and some reason or other, we stepped in a hole, both baby and I went underwater. And I said, we're either both going to make it or we're both not going to make it. And we hit something, came back up, finished the journey, got him to the deuce and a half, and that's the last I saw of the child. Later on, we kept hearing screams. And there's two guys hung up in a tree right behind the house along the creek and took a rope, tied around my neck, not my neck, around my shoulders, below my armpits, and went in and got him out. One guy was pretty good shape. He held the other guy in the water, held the guy in the tree, so he wasn't good. But the other guy was as stiff as a board. We put our arms under his arms, dove in backwards, and they dragged me out. He was so stiff, he was like a chair. We got an axe that took a door off a trailer house, made a stretcher, took him to a Jeep, and they took him to Ellsworth Hospital where he's checked out. I understand he lived. I tell these stories because I swear to God, if it had been daylight, I don't know if we'd done half the stuff we did. It was really, truly a dark night, a dangerous night. If you'd have seen that river coming down at you, I don't think you'd have guts enough to go in. I always wondered how I'd do it in combat. I think maybe I'd do okay after that. But it was really scary, very dangerous, and the water is so strong. There was when someone at luncheon talked about the REACT group, at that bridge, there's people on the north and south side of the bridge. We were on the south side. On the north side, there's a crew of REACT, a radio operator, amateur, they're basically CV radios, and they're amateur radio club that keep talking to people. They're their second line of defense for communications. 3 of them drowned. We lost them. There was a highway patrolman, as I understand, was also up there. He got washed away. If you've ever seen a pistol in a holster, his pistol grip caught the rail. That's what saved his life. Think how close he was to going away. I think that's about it. It was a terrible night. And for the next couple of days, my brother and I helped looking for people. And I know to show you how good the people were, we were on a body search with a B-52 crew. We had the pilot, co-pilot, bomb gunner, navigator, tail gunner, and crew chief, the entire crew. People really pitched in. There were some bad eggs, but for the most part, they did wonders. And I'm like, Perry, I'm going to quit and let you answer questions later, okay? Thank you.
All right, Don, do you want to come to the lectern or do you want to stay seated where you're at? All right, please welcome Don Konechne. Last name is Konechne.
Thank you.
Yep.
I bought this farm in 1956 out on Box Elder Creek. I was 1 month out of the Army, 22 years old, and no money in my pocket. But I'm still on that farm, so that's another story. This one started in the afternoon of June 9th. We heard there was heavy rains up in the Nemo area, and Box Elder Creek flows through our place for about 2.5, 3 miles. So I called up the Martin family who had the Nemo guest ranch at that time, and Mrs. Martin said that the street lights came on at 3 in the afternoon, and the 55-gallon water barrels were overflowing ever since. So later on that afternoon, I moved the cattle herd off of the Box Elder Creek up to higher ground, and about 8:30 that evening, I drove over to Blackhawk where Highway 79 crosses Box Elder Creek. I stopped and got out, shined my light into the creek bottom, and it was bone dry. There were horses grazing in the creek, and the Greyhound racetrack was going on full blast. So shortly after I got back home, we lost our power, and my wife put our 3 boys to bed. The youngest was 3 years old, and we were sitting at the kitchen table with a Coleman lantern on when the neighbor girls come running over, screaming, "The creek is here, the creek is here, save our dad, save our dad." I said, "Where is your dad?" And she said, "He's stuck in a tree alongside of the house." So I threw a rope in the back of a pickup truck, drove across the road. He only lived about a half a block from where we did. And as I got over there, I could still see about 18 inches of the aluminum screen door, and I could see Don Snyder holding this tree alongside of the house. So as I drove into the water, I could see that wasn't going to work because the current started in the truck right away. I went back home, got a large farm tractor that was hooked to a disc, and I drove that over there, and I thought I'll back that into the water, get out on that disc, and throw him that rope. Well, I backed into the water, and the current was strong enough to jackknife that disc, and it wasn't going anywhere. So I turned the tractor around, drove into the water until the water killed the engine. I crawled out onto the hood of the tractor, and I threw that rope upstream a half a dozen times, hoping he was going to catch it. And finally he did. And his wife was with me on the tractor, and we hollered at him, "Tie it around your waist, tie it around your waist." And he did that, and he promptly the water. We tried to pull him in, and he was like a big fish out at the end of the line. He would come for air, and he would go under, and he'd come up for air, and he would go under. His wife said, "We're going to have to let him go, or he's going to drown out there." So we cut the rope loose, and away he went. Took about 5 minutes before he come walking up the roadbed, coughing up water, but he was still alive. So I told the family, "Our all high and dry." No, 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 they said, "We're scared to death. We're going to get out of here. We're going to town." Well, they were able to save one vehicle out of 4, so they had an automobile. My wife loaded our boys up into the pickup truck. We had to go through one of our farm fields to skirt the road, which was already underwater. And we went down I-90, come into Rapid City on 190, and Don Snyder's mother lived in a assisted living with a 2-bedroom apartment there. We all went there. Well, there was 10 of us, and I could see that wasn't going to work. So I took my family farther down the road to a high school buddy and his wife, Gene and Sharon Weber, and I knocked on the door, and I told them what was happening out in Box Elder Creek. And Mrs. Weber was head of the emergency room at St. John's Hospital at that time, and she said, "Well, maybe you better take me to work." So Gene and I, her husband and I, we took her down. I was still able to cross West Boulevard at Omaha Street, not the road yet, and I dropped her off at St. John's Hospital. There was a line of people standing outside the hospital, and the sidewalk was blood red. So I told my buddy Weber, I said, "Let's go out to the farm and pull my tractor out of the water." So we went out on the county road. We got to the Meade-Pennington County line, and that was the end of it. The whole valley was underwater. It looked like it was a half to 3/4 of a mile wide. Debris was floating down in front of us, parts of trailer houses. A pickup truck floated by with the headlights were still on. And there at the county line stood an Army deuce and a half with about 5 National Guard men in it. They were sent out to check on another family, the Classman family, that lived about a block west of our place, pretty close to Box Elder Creek. And they had a dormitory where they had 20 to 22 handicapped children that went to the Black Hills workshop in the daytime, and in the weekends the folks come and took them home. And these guys were sent to check on that family. And the guardsman asked me, "Do you think we can get over there?" And I said, I didn't know what the truck would do in water, but I said, "You better stop to see if the bridge is in when you get there." Well, the bridge wasn't in, but they didn't make it to the bridge. The water took that truck backwards down through the burrow pit. The lights went out. It floated it out into one of our farm fields, and you could just see the water over the top of the headlights around that truck. Well, the guys crawled out on top of the truck and were flashing a light at us, looking for help. I went to the Highway Patrol office on East North Street, and that was so we went down 190 into Rapid, and right where Central High School is built today, where that underpass is, there was another patrolman blocking traffic. We were telling him what we needed, and about that time, a home come down Rapid Creek. It hit the bridge, and it broke into a dozen pieces, and it all caught on fire. And it was going through the trees between Omaha Street and where the Civic Center is today. A very weary-looking, crazy-looking picture. Well, he got in the car, and he took off back to the state, so we did the same thing. And we caught up with another Army truck going to Wasta on a rescue mission, and they said, "Go to the cement plant, and you can get into the guard camp." Well, we did that, and when we got to the guard camp, Duke Corning was in there, Mayor Barnett was in there with him, and a bunch of people from one of the nursing homes near Bennett Clarkson Hospital were all in there. So we were telling them what happened out our way and what we needed. And Duke Corning said, I'll send a pontoon boat out to rescue the men, and I'm going to send an officer out with you guys because you've got to get to that family with all of those kids. So we headed out on the county road again, got to the Meade-Pennington County line, the same situation. The whole place was still underwater, debris floating by everywhere. So the officer says to me, how do we get over there? I said, well, we'll have to go back, get on the interstate at the Windmill truck stop, drive over the Box Elder Creek Bridge, and then walk through about a half mile of our hayfield and come in on the upper side. He said, all right, let's do that. I Windmill truck stop, got on the interstate. Traffic was going nowhere, and it was backed up almost to where Butler Caterpillar is today. He said, go down the line of vehicles. And I was wondering what those truckers thought as I was going around him where that guy was going in that pickup truck. But when I got to that bridge, I could see why nobody was going. There was debris built on the upper bridge, and water was hitting that debris, and it was flowing over the top of the upper bridge, the one headed east, and it was coming down between the two bridges, and it washed out the piling underneath the westbound bridge, and that bridge fell in. We were able to walk underneath that water with barely getting our shirts wet because it was going over the top of us. And as we crossed that bridge, there lay the first body, face down, no shirt on, looked like he had probably fireman's boots on. I touched him as we went by, and of course he was ice cold. We walked through that hayfield, we come into the upper side of the Classman house, and Mrs. Classman said that they roped all the children together and they tried to lead them through our hayfield to get up on the hillside, and when the children got into 1 foot of water, they all panicked and wouldn't go any farther. So she said they took them all back to the dormitory and prayed that the dorm would stay there. It was made out of cement block on a little higher level than the rest of the buildings, and it did survive. Everything else down below kind of went with the flood. So then took the Army officer back, and I dropped him off at the guard camp, went back to the Weber's house. This was 3 o'clock in the morning that we crossed over Box Elder Creek with that Army officer. I took him back home, and I went to the Weber house and grabbed a couple hours of sleep. We picked up Don Snyder, and we drove back out to the county line to see what it looked like in the daylight. It was really an eerie looking situation. Steam was coming off of all of the ground where the flood had been, and it was hanging there low. There was debris scattered everywhere. There were vehicles, there were parts of trailer houses, and there was a South Dakota Highway patrolman cutting the barbed wire fence off of the road, and we were able to walk on in. We got to our mailbox, which stayed high and dry, and from there we could see the Snyder house was completely gone. Their double garage was gone. Their single garage was gone. My tractor and disc were gone. Everything went. Well, all that was left there was a natural gas line was shooting up through the water like Old Faithful, and that was about it. We walked over to our place, and debris built up in front of our old farmhouse, and nothing got into the farmhouse at all. The carpet was dry. The hot water tank, a propane tank, the pilot light was on. And our 2 farm dogs survived staying on the porch, but our barnyard was completely wiped out. There were the posts and poles and everything else went. There were 3 great big beams that went through the south side of our barn and never made it out. The beams were 40 feet long, 2 foot wide, and 10 inches thick. And the reason I can tell you this is I've got one of them holding up the side of my barn yet today. So that's the kind of mess we had down there. That was on Saturday. Sunday morning, I come out by myself, and I found out that the cattle herd was gone. So I got the saddle horse, and I started tracking through the mud, and they were up underneath the interstate bridge, the one broken down. The National Guard camp was cleaning out the upper bridge to try to get traffic flowing again. As I rode that horse up toward that bridge, there was another body floating in the debris, no shirt on, long blonde hair, face down. I got a little bit farther down the creek, and there was another man. He had a green shirt on. His head was all black and blue, and he was floating right side up. About a month later, in the middle of July, I'm walking this creek looking for the Snyder vehicles, and a sandbar got exposed, and there was another body laying in the sandbar face down. I could see he had a billfold in his pocket, and I reached down to get it, and he was an airman from Ellsworth Air Force Base. You had a number that you called in Rapid City, and then recovery men come out. I never went to where they got them. I just pointed out where they were at, and that was it. So I had, the night of the flood, I had 6 great big haystacks out in this hayfield below the interstate. The next morning I had 2 left. The other 4 went down the creek along with a set of our corrals. The force of the water was so great in the set of the corrals it sucked the pump right out from the well. So that shows how strong the current was. Now, I was 39 years old when the flood came, and I was able to rebuild the farm. Now I'm 2 weeks away from turning 89, and I'd have a harder time rebuilding it. But I paid $25,000 for that farm in 1956, and the Corps of Engineers let a contract to clean it up for $104,500. End of my story. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Were you expecting that story? That's amazing. Mark, come on up.
I really like listening to Don. He has such a great way of speaking, and it kind of reminds me. Last night there was so many testimonies and so forth that were given at this new premiere that's coming out, the South Dakota Public Broadcast, and it seems like it's taken 50 years for people to really open up. I've heard more stories and really what's happened, with people and their personal stories, actually in the last week or so than I have in the previous 50 years, I think. I wonder if I could get a little help with the slides. Anyway, thanks for the invite, and I also want to thank the organizers. What I just said about people opening up and telling more of their stories, and we're learning a lot more about the 72 flood now than we have in many years before. So it's great. I'm going to follow on to one of the comments that Perry made, and that is that he showed a floodplain map and geologic map. Well, it turns out that rivers like to use their floodplains. Let's put it that way. And it's often been said that floods are to rivers what wildfires are to forests. It's a regenerative kind of process, and it's a natural process, and they also have a way of changing things. So you want to talk about how Rapid City has changed, and clearly it has, but other floods of history have made phenomenal changes. For example, the Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood was a dam break, but it killed something on the order of 2,200 people, but it changed American law for good. It changed it from fault-based to liability-based. American Red Cross got its start and responded first to the Johnstown flood. The St. Francis Dam failure that happened in California changed the requirements in California that all engineers that are involved with designing floods had to have engineering certification and be certified, as well as the law required them to consider geologic factors when they're constructing dams. Mississippi River flood of 1927, articulated well in a book called Red Tide, talked about how that flood, Mississippi River flood of 1927, actually changed the politics. Calvin Coolidge was reluctant to send federal resources to help the people that were stuck on levees, and it actually ushered in an era that they say actually brought about the New Deal of subsequently with Roosevelt. So I wasn't going to share much of my personal testimony. I was going to talk a little more technically, and so bear with me. What I'm going to share is just really the highlights of what I delivered at the hydrology conference that Galen organized here about a month ago. So what I did was I went across, what are the factors that really made this such a disastrous event for Rapid City, made it one of the worst in history. And each one of these is something I could develop, but I'm just going to scan through them now in the interest of time. But there is a role for government. For example, Pactola Dam was constructed with the idea of ending flooding for Rapid City, and that allowed the zoning that Perry talked about. As I've said before, some of the most prestigious addresses in Rapid City were right along the flood. People wanted, their decks out on the deck, all over the creek. Design of Canyon Lake Dam contributed. I'll talk about that a little later. There was a lack of urgency in the warnings initially, and people didn't heed them either. Vehicles were used to evacuate in the floodwaters. Many people died in cars, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Some of the aspects of nature of flash floods, stage rises very rapidly. A lot of the testimony I've seen on the newspaper as well as on the TVs lately, people talk about water was kind of around, it was wet, and then all of a sudden they were hit with a surge and this rapid stage rise. And then the other problem with flash floods like this, the leading edge is almost always carrying a bunch of debris. I don't have time to show some of the slides, but the front end of a stage rise is usually be very difficult to stand up in. And then of course the failure of Canyon Lake Dam. So I just put this here to talk real quickly about the Canyon Lake Dam outlet works was actually a better trash rack than it was a hydraulic structure that allowed water to pass. So it early on in the event plugged up with pontoon boats and cars and logs and so forth, which destroyed its hydraulic efficiency. Stage rise, real quickly, this idea that water near the base is interacting with the bed and all the trees and so forth, and so it's impeded in its flow. That arrow is a little bit smaller than that arrow, so the velocity at the high part of the stage is greater than and so that tends to make the top of it overcome, which gives you the fast stage rise. So real quick, the idea that this is about how much water is fell over the Black Hills that night, about 670,000 acre feet. This is roughly to scale. The amount of water that actually passed through Rapid City was about 10,700 square feet, and this little dot right there is how much water was in Canyon Lake when it failed. So proportionally it was very small, but it had a big impact, and I'll show that in a moment. So these are the numbers that came from Schwartz. 1975 was a professional paper done by the USGS Weather Service and others. So Rapid Creek peaked. This is the gauge that's right above. This is the fish hatchery, and that's Cleghorn Canyon. This is, as you're going up Highway 44, peaked at about 11:15 at 31,000 CFS. Cleghorn Canyon, this nasty little sucker really can produce discharge 12,600 CFS about 10 p.m. So they're a little bit asynchronous. They didn't add up exactly at the same time. So that's the reason why flowing into Canyon Lake was about 41,500. Now keep in mind that the average flow of Rapid Creek is a little higher in the summertime, but the average flow for the year is about 60 cubic feet per second, would be a little higher, sometimes 80 or 90 with releases from Pactola in the summer. So we're talking about lots of water compared normally. Anyway, keep that number in mind because we're going to come back to that. So one of the things that happened, of course, is that with the flooding, the amount of water in the lake surged over the top of this rock wall was there in 72 flood, and there's flood damage on these trees. And so the survey shows that roughly about 3 feet of water was flowing over the top of the dam itself before it failed. So what that meant was that it kind of caused a surge in the amount of storage, and when that was released, it was released quite suddenly, on the order of 30, maybe as much as 45 minutes, but the majority of it was released in about 30 minutes. So we all hear the number, about 50,000 CFS for the flood. But actually the best measurement the USGS made in the whole Rapid Creek drainage was an indirect measurement that was made on the Meadowbrook Golf Course, and that was at 57,000, initially 200, and they changed it to 57,500. Remember what the number was coming into Canyon Lake? It's about 42,000 if you round it up. So, there's 15 or 16,000 CFS that came out of Canyon Lake that wasn't coming in. And where did that come from? That caused the surge, if you will. So real quickly, I only have 2 more slides. So this is the outflow from Canyon Lake Dam was modeled by Dr. Tom Propson at School of Mines. So this is inflows in blue. This is the water coming in. And remember, there it peaks right there at 41, 42,000. This is the outflow if the dam hadn't failed, would have been there. And then the solid red line is the outflow with failure. So what happened was, and then I'll go to the next slide. And there's your storage from Canyon Lake. The effect of the release of Canyon Lake suddenly was to spike the flow. So this robbed people of time to get out of the way, and that created a lot of damage. So, this is my last slide. Next time. What happens next time? Will there be another flood? Yes. Nothing's changed about the meteorology on the east side of the Black Hills. The canyon geography is still the same. Just as a quick example, Big Thompson flood in 1976 down in Colorado, similarly positioned up against the Colorado Front Range. 144 people died there in 1976. But then again in 2013, 9 people died and 2,000 homes were damaged, even though they did take some of their lessons as well from the 76 flood. We've taken factors to reduce the risk. That's great. As Perry said, we owe a lot to Mayor Barnett. I saw him back there a minute ago. The city, the idea that we have much better warning systems now than we did before. We still have to get people to heed the warnings, however, but the warning systems are in place. And thanks to the Weather Service and the USGS, Canyon Lake Dam has improved the spillway. It's not likely to, clog up with debris again, and there's less water in storage. So definitely made, and of course, there is improvement of the greenway, which should allow the water to pass through unimpeded. But this is my but. There will be less. If we have the same flood come through Rapid City, we'll have loss of life, and mainly it'll be with people and vehicles, because people don't really have an appreciation, if they aren't seeing this regularly, how deep a water is and how hazardous it is. So just like Big Thompson, I'm concerned that there will be loss of life the next time we have the same kind of flood, but it'll be largely from vehicles, not people sleeping in their houses. The great thing about the greenway is it allows for an unimpeded flow to pass through the town. The one slight downside of that, though, is with all the grass and the streets like Omaha and Jackson Boulevard, that reduces the roughness coefficient of the channel, so the velocity is going to be faster coming through next time. So it'll be really important to get people off the floodplain and their cars. So I've always said on a number of occasions, one of the things that is left to do is we need to have a plan for rapid closure of the streets and evacuation of the floodplain, flood path, because it will be a real tough place to be if the same kind of flood passes through. Fortunately, there won't be that surge coming out of Canyon Lake Dam like we had before, but still velocity is likely to be high or higher. So with that, that's my comments.
Questions? No. Oh, yes, sir.
How many feet does Canyon Lake hold now compared to 550 when it had?
Who would want to answer that?
I don't have the exact number. The 550 number. The 550 number was a calculation of the surge, the 3 foot above the wall, as well as more area was inundated. So the exact number I'm not sure, but it is lower. But the one thing I will say is that today it's really not the amount of water in storage that it's the hazard. It was the dam. So if water coming in to the lake passes out, which is a much better designed spillway, then there isn't an issue with how much water is, because whatever comes in goes out, and then the storage stays there. So storage isn't really much of a risk.
One part of my story, I'm a loud talker, so I better be careful here. One part of my story that I've kind of omitted was that I'm a strong believer that a second wall of water came down Box Elder Creek that killed everybody and washed away those buildings and stuff like that. In 1963, my wife hauled me up Nemo Road where the highway crosses Box Elder Creek for the first time. That's called the Smith Ranch. There were two ranches on the west side of the road, one below. She dropped me off there, and I backpacked down that creek. And as you walk down that creek, as you get closer to Blackhawk, the canyon wall is narrowed really, really narrow and steep. It kind of looks like Spearfish Canyon, and the creek flowed between that. And I believe a big pile of debris built up in that canyon walls, and when that gave way, here come that second wall of water. Ray Walls was the highway patrolman in charge of a rescue mission on the south side of Blackhawk, the same creek I looked at an hour earlier, and he told me that they were trying to get an elderly couple out of a home right across from the dog track, and he had a spotlight on the REA meter, and he said the creek abruptly dropped several feet, so they launched the boat, the rescue men did, and he said a few seconds later he could hear this noise coming down the creek. He threw the spotlight up the creek, and he said he swore the water was 10, 12 foot high coming straight up and down with debris falling in front of it. Him and another guy ran toward the Rapid City side, and they survived. He looked back to watch his patrol car being washed away, and all the guys on the Blackhawk side of the creek also got washed away. Two of them ended up in trees, and they survived. The rest of them are the bodies that came down to our place. So I think when that second wall came down through here, that's what did the damage to everybody, and that's what drowned the men. Thank you.
One quick follow-up. I wanted to say that my wife is here, Carla. She was also in the flood with me, as well as my sister and brother-in-law. My sister was reported for duty at the Bennett Clarkson Hospital and had the duty of trying to figure out how to get patients up and whatnot. And she heard the screams, which I think was that Vanderbeek son or child that was in the tree there. But anyway, Don and Cindy Walker and my wife, Carla.
So the actual break of the dam was around, what, 10:45, 11:15?
Yeah, sometime between 10:45 and 11. We pulled the power on the house, and the clock stopped at 10 minutes to 11, and the surge had hit our house on Central and Jackson then.
Figured out the time, but at the time I was living in South Canyon on Hall Street. I was going to school on MCB, and my mother was quite worried about that line creek running through there. So I went over. I had to get up early in the morning, supposedly to go to work at the post office clinic on Jackson Boulevard there. So I had to go to bed early because I had to get up and go to work early. So I checked Line Creek, and I came back and I told my mother, I said, it's fine, there's no problem with that. Well, she was worried about Canyon Lane. So I followed Susan Drive over to where the bridge crossed Rapid Creek there, and it was about 10 inches or 12 inches below the bottom of the bridge there. And that was just an hour before the dam broke. So I always thought, boy, did I escape a good one? Because I just wrote back on Susan. I told Mom, I said, no worry. I said, the water's up there underneath the bridge, but no problem.
So the water would have flowed over the dam for a while, the earthen dam, which caused some of the initial surge, but then, like, it was a different stream, but it was the second surge that really, when the actual breach of the dam happened and it was all released, was probably a little bit later, but it certainly was before. I mean, when it actually peaked, it was would have been just before 11:30 probably. I mean, that's when the peak happened, but water would have been coming over the top, and it would have been difficult to navigate around.
Probably a couple hours of safety there then.
Well, I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't take much to float a car.
Looks like we've reached our
Well, the earliest maps and air photos that I've looked at indicate Rapid Creek was straightened probably around the year 1900, maybe into 1910, in that time. And the old meander was just a low spot, a swimming hole for people, and even up through the 40s. But eventually became obliterated by streets and town.
All right. Thank you for coming.